To reconnect?
The interwebs.
Welcome to the first part of the last part of Illuminating the Legacy of Slavery in Rhode Island. I'd like to begin with some thank yous. Thank you to our artists, writers, and scholars, playwright and poet Nahasadi Dagan, historians Christy Clark-Pujara, author of Dark Work, The Business of Slavery in Rhode Island, and Morgan Grief of the Rhode Island Historical Society, writer Marlon O'Perry, visual artist Lois for our projections, and women project members Cristina. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Say it real quick.
DiCheria.
DiCheria. So it was two of us, and Tammy Brown and Jocelyn Foy for their research and editing and countless hours of work on this project.
And Susie.
And I'm not done yet. And Susie for bringing us necessary technological equipment, whom we would not have this beautiful projection without her today. And thank you to our funders, the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, and the Providence Department of Arts and Culture. Now, without further ado, I will introduce our performer, Tammy Brown.
Woo!
Yay!
We must first acknowledge that we are standing on stolen land. This stolen land was named Cranston after the slaveholder and profiteer Samuel Cranston. It was under the leadership of Governor Samuel Cranston that Rhode Island dominated the industry of the transatlantic slave trade. Not only did Rhode Island dispatch more slave ships than any other state in the Union, but Rhode Island grew rich, exporting rough cotton cloth that clothed the slaves and the rum, food, and tools demanded by slave plantations in the West Indies, all under the leadership of Governor Samuel Cranston. We are standing on stolen land. The captured prisoners of the Pequot War in 1637, members of the Pequot, the Narragansett, and the Wampanoag clans were the first to be enslaved here. For the first 100 years, they were sold and traded as property, way before the first enslaved Africans arrived in 1638, courtesy of William Pierce from Salem, Massachusetts, who traded 17 Pequot captives in the West Indies for some cotton and tobacco and negroes. See those ships sailing out of Newport and Providence off to the western Cape of Africa to body snatch humans, usually between 200 and 600 human beings below the decks in cargo. Now, the average Rhode Islander in the 17th and 18th centuries were quite accustomed to buying a few shares in a slave voyage. It was no different than buying shares in a corporation is for us today. It was a high-risk investment, but if successful, meaning if the captains of these ships managed to capture or barter or kidnap women, children, and men, and sell the strongest of them in the Caribbean, they would receive a tidy profit. Now, while people from Africa and native peoples were subjected to cruel and unusual punishment for merely existing, they exhibited breathtaking acts of resistance that many Americans continue to this day. Cato Pierce had been enslaved to Joshua Pierce in North Kingstown. When he was born, the buying and selling of slaves was technically illegal in Rhode Island, but his parents were enslaved people, and so, at birth, Cato was legally the property of their enslaver until he turned 18 years old. He escaped, was recaptured in Warwick, and escaped again. And by 1820, there were just 48 people enslaved in the Rhode Island census. And so Cato returned, assuming that it must be safe to live as a black man in Rhode Island by now. He worked as a laborer for Elijah Potter, Rhode Island senator and U.S. congressman, born and living in Cranston. On Sundays, Cato was a preacher. Elisha Potter resented Cato Pierce's preaching, apparently believing he should be no more than a laborer. One day, Potter confronted Cato Pierce, threatened to whip him, and had him jailed. These are the words of Christy Clark Pujara, author of Dark Work, The Business of Slavery in Rhode Island. Potter, a politically connected, large landholder and former member of the enslaver class, felt entitled to Pierce's labor and obedience, and he had significant sway in the community. In fact, he had had enough social power to have Cato Pierce illegally arrested and jailed. Fortunately for Pierce, members of the court convinced Potter to release Pierce, who, after all, had done nothing illegal. Pierce had been jailed for preaching. Really, he had been jailed for acting like a free man, something that Potter and many other white Northerners could not come to grips with following the collapse of perpetual hereditary slavery in the North. So twice, Cato Pierce was snatched off the street in a free northern state and held in bondage by men who had more social and political power than him, but had no real authority. How is this a parable for the current day? Who else in our country can be snatched up and jailed? Whose bodies are policed by people who have power over them? How do our laws enforce that power today? The Texas law that was recently passed last month deputizes any person to bring civil action against any person who aids and abets anyone having an abortion after 6 weeks. The law empowers and rewards civilians to take action against any person who intends to engage in aiding and abetting abortion. This is a law that not only controls women's bodies, it's a law controlling the thoughts and intentions and discussions that people may have regarding their own bodies. Picture the flyers hung across this nation describing runaway slaves, offering an award for their capture. The Texas law offers $10,000 to any civilian who brings a civil lawsuit against anyone who performs or assists with or intends to assist a woman seeking an abortion. Some people's bodies are still being policed in this nation. Just consider the chilling effects alone, knowing that you can be criminalized by fellow citizens just for thinking, speaking, being, for doing your job. A free black man who chooses to preach on weekends, a pregnant black woman in distress about her pregnancy and weighing her options. These people are subjected to civil retribution. This is a legacy of people in power policing the bodies of people who have less power. Who has power over marginalized bodies to this day? How do we resist the policing of bodies by powerful people? And who are the politicians and powerful people that today write the laws that trade other people's freedom for their own profits? Thank you. That concludes part 1 of our readings and projection series. Stay tuned for part 2, where we visit another location in Cranston, named after the slaveholder Samuel Cranston, and join us in a few minutes.